The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Wild Creek Farm as Daniel Wild wiped the sweat from his forehead. At 30 years old, his hands were already rough from years of hard work, his skin tanned from endless days under the sun. The small farmhouse, nestled among green fields and surrounded by wooden fences, had been his whole world since his parents died when he was just 18. "Come on, girl," he called to his border collie, Sadie, who trotted faithfully at his heels as they headed toward the barn. Another day of work was coming to an end. Daniel had spent the morning fixing the tractor, the afternoon harvesting vegetables for tomorrow's farmer's market, and now all he wanted was a hot shower and a simple dinner before bed. The same routine he'd followed for years, interrupted only by the changing seasons. His grandmother Martha had raised him after his parents' car accident, teaching him everything about running the farm. But 3 years ago, she too had passed away, leaving Daniel truly alone with nothing but 50 acres of land, a farmhouse filled with memories, and a heart that had learned to find comfort in silence. "At least I've got you," he said to Sadie, scratching behind her ears as they reached the porch steps. Just as he was about to open the door, a sound caught his attention. He turned toward the long driveway that led from the main road to his property. Squinting against the setting sun, he could make out a figure approaching on foot. As the figure drew closer, Daniel realized it was a woman. She moved slowly, as if each step required effort. Her clothes were wrinkled, her dark hair tangled by the wind. Even from a distance, Daniel could see the exhaustion in her posture. "Stay, Sadie," he commanded gently. Walking down the steps to meet the stranger, when she reached the fence that surrounded his front yard, she stopped. Up close, Daniel could see she was young, maybe in her late 20s. Her face was beautiful, despite the tiredness etched into it, her eyes large and dark, holding a mixture of desperation and determination. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked, his deep voice breaking the silence between them. The woman swallowed hard, pride visibly battling with necessity in her expression. Her hands gripped the wooden fence so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "I'm not asking for charity," she finally said, her voice soft but steady. "Just food. I'll work for it. Anything you need." Daniel studied her for a moment. Her shoes were worn thin, and she carried no bag, no purse, nothing that suggested she had anywhere else to go. Something in her eyes reminded him of himself after his parents died, lost but refusing to break. Without hesitation, he stepped aside, opening the door to his farmhouse. "I'll give you a home, a meal, .. He paused, surprised by the words that came next, "and all my love, if you'll let me." The woman looked at him in shock, then let out an awkward laugh, as if waiting for him to say he was joking when his expression remained sincere. Her laughter faded into uncertainty. "You don't even know my name," she said softly. "Then tell me," Daniel replied. Natalie Reyes." Daniel Wild. He nodded toward the open door. "Come in, Natalie. You look like you could use a good meal." Natalie hesitated, looking from Daniel to the farmhouse and back again. Trust didn't come easily to her, not anymore. But hunger and exhaustion made the decision for her. Slowly, she opened the gate and walked through. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and freshly baked bread. It wasn't fancy worn wooden countertops, a table with 4 chairs, simple curtains on the windows, but it was clean and welcoming. Sadie trotted in behind them, eyeing Natalie with curious interest. "Sit down," Daniel gestured to the table. "I made beef stew this morning. There's plenty left." As he moved around the kitchen, warming the stew and cutting thick slices of bread, Natalie sat rigidly in her chair, looking ready to bolt at any moment. "Where did you come from?" Daniel asked, setting a glass of water in front of her. Natalie took a long drink before answering. "The city, Seattle. That's a long way to walk." "I didn't walk all the way," she admitted. "I took the bus as far as my money would go, walked the rest." Daniel nodded, not pressing for more as he placed a steaming bowl of stew and bread in front of her. Natalie stared at the food for a moment, then began to eat slowly at first, then, with increasing urgency as her hunger took over. When she finished, she looked up to find Daniel watching her with gentle eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I'll start working tomorrow. I can clean, cook, whatever you need." "You'll rest tomorrow," Daniel said firmly. "The work will still be here when you're stronger." For the first time, anger flashed in Natalie's eyes. "I'm not looking for charity. I told you I'd work." "And you will," Daniel assured her. "This farm has more work than one person can handle, but you need rest first." "That's not charity. It's common sense." Before Natalie could argue further, Daniel stood up. "Come on, I'll show you where you can sleep." He led her to a small bedroom at the end of the hallway. It was simple but clean, with a double bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a wooden dresser, and curtains that matched those in the kitchen. "This was my sister's room," Daniel explained, opening a drawer to pull out a clean t-shirt and sweatpants. "She lives in California now, married with 2 kids. These might be big on you, but they're clean." Natalie took the clothes, holding them against her chest like armor. "Your sister won't mind me staying in her room." "Emma hasn't lived here in 8 years, Daniel said with a small smile. "I think she'll forgive us." Bathrooms across the hall. There are clean towels on the shelf. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Natalie, she looked up, her dark eyes wary. Whatever you're running from, you're safe here. After he closed the door, Natalie stood frozen in the middle of the room. His words echoed in her mind. You're safe here. How long had it been since she felt safe anywhere? The hot shower washed away days of travel grime, but couldn't erase the memories that had driven her to this point. As the water pounded against her skin, Natalie thought about the life she'd left behind, the city apartment she could no longer afford, the friends who disappeared when she lost her job, the boyfriend who'd claimed to love her until she had nothing left to give. She'd come to the end of her rope in Seattle, no money, no job, no hope, so she'd taken what little she had left and gotten on a bus, with no destination in mind except away. When she emerged from the bathroom wearing Daniel's sister's clothes, she found him sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea. Some too, he said, nodding to a second mug. Chamomile helps with sleep. Natalie sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Why are you doing this? She asked bluntly. Daniel considered her question seriously. My grandmother used to say that kindness should be given freely, not earned. People don't work that way, Natalie countered. Everyone wants something. What do you think I want? Daniel asked, his voice quiet. Natalie's eyes dropped to her tea. She'd been asked that question before, by men who made their intentions clear enough, but Daniel's gaze held no hidden agenda, no hunger that made her skin crawl. I don't know, she admitted. Help with a farm would be nice, Daniel said with a small smile. It's a lot for one person, but that's not why I let you in. He paused, searching for the right words. I know what it's like to have nowhere to go. The simplicity of his answer caught Natalie off guard. For the first time since arriving, she really looked at him, the tired lines around his eyes, the strength in his shoulders, the gentleness in his hands as he held his mug. Get some sleep, Daniel said, standing up. Morning comes early on a farm. To bed in Emma's room was the softest thing Natalie had felt in weeks. As she sank into it, pulling the quilt up to her chin, she tried to make sense of what had happened. She'd knocked on a stranger's door, expecting, at best, a meal in exchange for work. Instead, she'd found what kindness without strings attached seemed too good to be true. Yet as sleep pulled her under, one thought remained. For tonight at least, she was safe. Daniel lay awake in his own room, listening to the familiar creaks of the old farmhouse. What had possessed him to invite a complete stranger into his home, to offer not just food and shelter, but his heart as well? The words had surprised him as much as they had surprised her. Maybe it was the loneliness that had become his constant companion since Grandma Martha died. Maybe it was something in Natalie's eyes, the same fierce determination to survive that had gotten him through his darkest days. Whatever it was, for the first time in years, the silence of the farmhouse didn't feel quite so empty. The next morning, Daniel woke before dawn as usual. He moved quietly through the house, making coffee and preparing to start his day. When he stepped onto the porch with his first cup, he was surprised to find Natalie already there, watching the sunrise. You're up early, he said, joining her at the railing. Couldn't sleep anymore, she admitted, not used to so much quiet. Daniel nodded, understanding. Coffee, please. He went back inside and returned with a second mug, which she accepted gratefully. It's beautiful here, Natalie said after a while, her eyes taking in the fields and forests that surrounded the farm. Peaceful most days, Daniel agreed. Though when the tractor breaks down or the roof leaks, peaceful isn't exactly the word that comes to mind. That drew a small smile from Natalie, the first genuine one he'd seen. It transformed her face, softening the wariness that seemed permanently etched there. I meant what I said yesterday, she said, her voice stronger. After a night's rest, I want to work. I need to. Daniel recognized the pride in her voice, the need to give something back, to not feel like a charity case. It was a feeling he understood all too well. Fair enough, he said. Can you cook? Yes, good, because I'm terrible at it. Been living on stew and sandwiches for too long. He finished his coffee and set the mug down. I need to check on the chickens. Rest today. Start in the kitchen tomorrow. I want to help now, Natalie insisted. Show me the chickens. Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but you tell me if you get tired. The chicken coop was behind the barn, a sturdy structure that housed 24 hens and one very proud rooster. Daniel showed Natalie how to check for eggs, how much feed to give them, and how to make sure their water was clean. They're funny little things, Natalie said, watching as the chickens pecked around their feet. One particularly bold hen was eyeing her shoelaces with interest. That's Henrietta, Daniel told her. She thinks everything is food until proven otherwise. Henrietta, Natalie raised an eyebrow. You name your chickens. Grandma Martha started it, Daniel explained, a hint of sadness crossing his face. Ed said, everything deserves a name and a kind word, even if it's destined for the dinner table eventually. Your grandmother sounds like she was quite a woman. She was, Daniel agreed. Raised me after my parents died. Taught me everything I know about this place. Natalie's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry about your parents. It was a long time ago, Daniel said, though the pain was still visible in his eyes. Car accident, I was 18. Emma was 16. They worked in comfortable silence after that, collecting eggs and refilling water containers. Despite her insistence that she was fine, Daniel could see the way Natalie's hands trembled slightly with exertion. She was still weak from her journey, though too proud to admit it. "That's enough for now," he said finally. "Let's head back to the house. I'm thinking pancakes for breakfast." Over breakfast, Daniel told Natalie more about the farm, the 50 acres that had been in his family for 3 generations, the vegetables he grew to sell at the farmer's market, the small orchard beyond the north field. "It's a lot for one person," Natalie observed, echoing his words from the night before. "It is," Daniel admitted. "Used to have help local high school kids during the summer, seasonal workers during harvest, but money's been tight the last few years. Bad weather, equipment breaking down. Is that why you needed help? Is the farm in trouble?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Might have to sell some acreage if things don't turn around. But that's not your problem." "It could be," Natalie said, surprising herself with the offer. "I mean, if I'm staying, I could help make it my problem too." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and something passed between the men, understanding, a connection neither had expected to find. "Are you?" he asked quietly. "Sting?" Natalie considered the question. She had nowhere else to go, no plan beyond the desperate hope that had driven her to his door. But there was something about this place, about Daniel himself, that made her want to stay, not just because she needed shelter, but because for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might belong somewhere. "If you'll have me," she said finally, "until I can get back on my feet." "I'll have you for as long as you want to stay," Daniel replied, his voice warm and steady like the man himself. That afternoon, despite Daniel's protests that she should rest, Natalie insisted on helping him in the vegetable garden. The work was hard, the sun hot on their backs, but there was satisfaction in it that Natalie hadn't expected. By the time they finished, her muscles ached and her hands were dirty, but she felt more alive than she had in months. As the days passed, a routine began to form. They would wake before dawn, share coffee on the porch, then tackle the day's work together. Natalie took over the cooking, using vegetables from the garden to create meals that made Daniel's stew seem bland by comparison. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch again, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. One evening, about a week after Natalie's arrival, Daniel came into the kitchen with a small wooden box. "Found this in the attic," he explained, setting it on the table. "Thought you might want to look through it." Emma's old clothes. She left a lot behind when she moved to California. Natalie opened the box to find neatly folded shirts, jeans, and dresses, simple practical clothes that would fit her much better than Daniel's oversized t-shirts. "Thank you," she said, running her fingers over a soft blue sweater. "I'll take good care of them. They're yours now," Daniel said simply. "Emma won't be coming back for them." That night, as Natalie changed into a nightgown from the box, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The dark circles under her eyes were fading, and her face had lost the gaunt look of someone who hadn't eaten properly in too long. But it was the expression in her eyes that surprised her most. The fear was receding, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. The next morning, Natalie found a note beside her breakfast plate. In Daniel's neat, no-nonsense handwriting, it said, "You don't have to earn your worth here." The simple words hit Natalie like a physical blow. All her life she'd been taught by parents who measured love in achievements, by friends who disappeared when she couldn't keep up, by men who wanted her only for what she could give them, that her value was tied to what she could provide. The idea that she might be worthy of kindness simply for existing was foreign, almost frightening in its simplicity. For the first time since arriving at Wild Creek Farm, Natalie cried. She sat at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face, clutching the note like a lifeline. That's how Daniel found her when he came in from the barn. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to fix whatever was wrong. He simply sat beside her and placed his hand over hers, offering silent support until the tears subsided. "I'm sorry," Natalie said finally, wiping her eyes. "I don't know what came over me. Don't apologize for feelings," Daniel said gently. "My grandmother always said tears are just the heart's way of speaking when words aren't enough." Natalie looked at him, this quiet man with his simple wisdom and endless patience. "Your grandmother was a very smart woman. The smartest person I ever knew," Daniel agreed with a sad smile. "She would have liked you, would she?" Natalie asked, genuinely curious. "Definitely. She always said I needed someone who could challenge me. Someone with fire in their eyes." Daniel's gaze held hers. "Like you." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Sadie barked outside, breaking the spell. "Better see what she's fussing about," Daniel said, standing up. But before he left, he squeezed Natalie's hand gently. "I meant what I wrote. You don't have to earn your place here." As Daniel walked out, Natalie looked down at the note again. Such simple words, yet they had cracked something open inside her, door she had kept locked for too long. That night, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness, Natalie finally began to tell Daniel about the life she'd left behind, the marketing job she'd lost when the company downsized, the apartment she couldn't afford without her salary, the so-called friends who had no room on their couches when she needed a place to stay. The worst part wasn't losing the job or the apartment, she admitted, her voice soft in the darkness. It was realizing how conditional everything was, how quickly people disappeared when I couldn't give them anything anymore. Daniel listened without interrupting, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. I've only ever been wanted for what I could give, Natalie concluded, echoing the fear that had haunted her since childhood. When I couldn't give any more, no one wanted me around. I want you around, Daniel said simply. Not for what you can give, just for you. Natalie turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. But there was only sincerity in his tired eyes. She asked, the question barely above a whisper. Daniel took a moment before answering, choosing his words carefully. I've lived a life full of silence. Then you showed up, and suddenly I want to be heard. The honesty of his answer took Natalie's breath away. This wasn't a smooth line from a man trying to get something from her. This was Daniel, laying bare his loneliness in a way that matched her own vulnerability under the stars. With the sounds of the night around them, something shifted between Natalie and Daniel. Not a declaration of love, it was too soon for that, but an acknowledgement of possibility. A recognition that perhaps they had found in each other something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed as they sat in comfortable silence. Watching the fireflies, Natalie realized that for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like running anymore. Instead, against all odds, she felt like she might have found a place to stay. 2 weeks had passed since Natalie arrived at Wild Creek Farm. The summer heat had settled over the land, making the days long and warm. In that short time, the farmhouse had transformed. The kitchen, once functional but plain, now smelled of fresh-baked bread and herbs from the garden. Vases of wildflowers brightened windowsills, and the room seemed lighter somehow, as if Nat's presence had chased away years of accumulated shadows. Daniel noticed the changes with quiet appreciation. It wasn't just the physical differences in the house that pleased him, but the way his own life had shifted. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for years had retreated, replaced by a comfortable routine built for two. Each morning, they would share coffee on the porch, planning the day's work. Then Daniel would head to the fields while Natalie tended to the chickens in the vegetable garden. She had taken to farm life with surprising ease, as if something in her had been waiting for this connection to the land. You're a natural, Daniel told her one morning as they collected eggs together. Most city folks can't adjust this quickly. Natalie smiled, carefully placing an egg in her basket. Maybe I was meant for country life all along. Just took me a while to find it. Daniel watched her, noticing how the sun brought out golden highlights in her dark hair. In the 2 weeks she'd been at the farm, she had changed. Her face had filled out, losing the gaunt look of hunger, and her eyes held a spark that hadn't been there when she first arrived. She looked healthier, stronger and more beautiful than ever. The thought caught him off guard. He'd been so focused on making sure Natalie had what she needed to heal that he hadn't fully acknowledged the feelings growing inside him. But they were there, taking root like seeds in fertile soil. Earth to Daniel. Natalie waved a hand in front of his face, laughing. You're a million miles away. Sorry, he said, feeling heat rise to his face. Just thinking about everything we need to do before the farmer's market tomorrow. Speaking of which, Natalie said, closing the chicken coop door. I was wondering if I could go with you to the market. Daniel looked at her in surprise. Since arriving at the farm, Natalie hadn't once mentioned wanting to leave the property. If anything, she seemed content to stay within the boundaries of Wild Creek, as if the outside world might vanish if she acknowledged it. Of course, he said. I could use the help. Saturdays are busy. I've never been to a farmer's market before, Natalie admitted as they walked back to the house. Not as a seller anyway. Nothing to it, Daniel assured her. We set up a table, arrange the produce, and people come by to buy it. Some of the same customers every week, folks who appreciate fresh food. Will they... Natalie hesitated. Will they ask about me? Daniel understood her concern. Small towns ran on gossip, and a new woman appearing at Daniel Wild's farm stand would definitely raise eyebrows. Probably, he said honestly. People here are curious by nature, but they're also kind. You don't have to tell them anything you don't want to. Natalie nodded, but he could see the worry in her eyes. Whatever she was running from, she wasn't ready for questions about her past. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual that had become precious to both of them, Daniel found himself wanting to know more about the life Natalie had left behind. She had shared bits and pieces, the lost job, the failed relationships, but there were still so many gaps in her story. Can I ask you something? He said finally, his voice gentle in the gathering dusk. Natalie turned to him, her expression wary but open. Sure. What did you do in Seattle? I mean, before... double quotes, before everything fell apart. Natalie finished for him with a sad smile. She was quiet for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. I worked in marketing for a tech company. Nothing exciting, creating campaigns, writing copy, attending meetings that could have been emails. Did you like it? Natalie considered the question. I thought I did. It paid well, gave me nice clothes and a downtown apartment. But looking back, I think I was just going through the motions, playing a part I thought I was supposed to play. What part was that? Successful career woman, someone who had it all together. Natalie's laugh held no humor. Turns out, none of it was real. The friends, the relationship, the security, it all disappeared so fast. Daniel wanted to reach for her hand but held back, sensing she needed space to tell her story. His name was James, Natalie continued, looking out at the darkening fields rather than at Daniel. We dated for 2 years. Lived together for one. When I lost my job, he was supportive at first. Said we'd figure it out together. She paused, her voice hardening. That lasted about 3 weeks. Then it was, you need to contribute and I can't carry us both. By the end of the month, he was seeing someone else, a woman from his office. I found out when I came home early and found them together. Daniel's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. I'm sorry. The worst part wasn't even the cheating, Natalie said quietly. It was realizing that his love had conditions attached, that I was only valuable to him when I could pay my half of the rent. Now Daniel did reach for her hand, unable to stop himself. To his relief, she didn't pull away. That's not love, he said firmly. Real love doesn't come with conditions. Natalie turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. Is that what your grandmother taught you? Among other things, Daniel said with a small smile. She was big on love being an action, not just a feeling, something you choose to do every day, even when it's hard. They sat in silence for a while, Natalie's hand still in his, both acutely aware of this new physical connection between them. What about you? Natalie asked finally. You've told me about your parents, your grandmother. But what about ... Has there been anyone special in your life? It was Daniel's turn to look away. There was someone, once. Her name was Sarah. We were together for 3 years, engaged for 1. What happened? Natalie asked softly. She wanted more than this. Daniel gestured to the farm around them, said she was tired of being a farmer's wife before she even was one. Tired of the early mornings and the constant work and the smell of manure on my clothes. He tried to keep the bitterness from his voice but didn't entirely succeed. She left for Chicago 6 years ago. Married a dentist, last I heard. I'm sorry, Natalie echoed his earlier words. Daniel shrugged, trying to appear more casual than he felt. It was for the best. This life, it's not for everyone. It's hard and dirty and the rewards aren't always obvious. I think the rewards are very obvious, Natalie said, surprising him. Every sunrise, every successful harvest, every animal born healthy, those seem like pretty clear rewards to me. Daniel looked at her with wonder. In just 2 weeks, this woman who had grown up in the city, who had never planted a seed or collected an egg before coming to Wild Creek, had seen the beauty in his way of life more clearly than Sarah had in 3 years. That the moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they both looked away, back to the darkening fields. We should get some rest, Daniel said after a while. Early start tomorrow for the market. That night, lying in bed, Daniel found himself unable to sleep. Natalie, the presence down the hall, felt more significant somehow after their conversation. The walls he'd built around his heart after Sarah left were crumbling, and it both terrified and exhilarated him. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the farmer's market. They loaded Daniel's old pickup truck with crates of vegetables, fresh eggs, and the honey he harvested from the beehives at the edge of his property. You look nice, Daniel said when Natalie emerged from the house wearing one of Emma's her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Natalie smoothed the fabric self-consciously. It's been a while since I wore a dress. Thought it might be good for meeting the neighbors. The farmer's market was held in the town square of Millfield, the small community about 20 minutes from Wild Creek Farm. As they drove, Daniel pointed out landmarks: the high school where he'd graduated, the diner with the best apple pie in the county, the library where his grandmother had worked part-time after retiring from teaching. Natalie listened with interest, trying to imagine Daniel as a boy in this small town, growing up with the certainty of knowing exactly where he belonged. The market was already bustling when they arrived. Vendors were setting up tables, arranging their goods with practiced hands. The air smelled of coffee and freshly baked pastries from the bakery stand, and someone was playing a guitar at the far end of the square. Daniel guided the truck to his usual spot and began unloading crates. Natalie helped, arranging vegetables in neat rows on the folding table he set up. Daniel Wild, as I live and breathe. A voice called out. Who's this pretty young thing you've brought with you? An elderly woman with bright eyes and a wide smile was making her way toward their stand. She walked with a cane, but there was nothing frail about her presence. Mrs. Jenkins, Daniel greeted her with genuine warmth. This is Natalie Reyes. She's but helping me out at the farm. Natalie, this is Dorothy Jenkins. She taught first grade to half the county, including me. Pleasure to meet you, dear, Mrs. Jenkins said, her sharp eyes taking in everything about Natalie. About time this boy brought some life back to that farm. Been worried about him rattling around that big house all alone. I wasn't rattling, Daniel protested good-naturedly. Humph. That's not what Martha would say, God rest her soul. Mrs. Jenkins turned back to Natalie. His grandmother was my dearest friend. Used to tell me that boy needed someone with spirit to match his own. Too stubborn for his own good, she'd say. Natalie couldn't help but smile at the older woman's frankness. He is stubborn, she agreed, especially about letting people help him. Mrs. Jenkins laughed delightedly. Oh, I like this one. Daniel, she's got your number. Daniel rolled his eyes, but there was no annoyance in the gesture. Are you here to gossip or to buy vegetables? Mrs. Jenkins. Both, obviously. She pointed to some tomatoes. I'll take 4 of those beauties, perfect for my salsa recipe. As Mrs. Jenkins paid and moved on, promising to return for a proper chat later, Daniel leaned close to Natalie. That's how it starts. By noon, everyone in town will know about you. Is that a bad thing? Natalie asked, suddenly anxious. Not at all, Daniel assured her. Just be prepared for questions and probably a few invitations to dinner. People here like to feed newcomers. As the morning progressed, Natalie met more of Daniel's neighbors and regular customers. True to his prediction, everyone was curious about her, but their questions remained polite, their welcome genuine. No one pressed when she gave vague answers about where she was from and how she'd come to Wild Creek. By midday, they had sold most of their produce. Natalie was arranging the remaining vegetables when she heard a female voice that made her freeze. Danny, I thought that was your truck I saw. Daniel turned, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness. Melissa didn't expect to see you here. The woman who approached their stand was strikingly beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a sundress that looked far too expensive for a small-town farmer's market. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew she was being watched, and enjoyed it. Just in town visiting Daddy for the weekend, she said, her voice sweet as honey. You know how he gets when I stay away too long. Her gaze shifted to Natalie, sharp with assessment. And who's this? Natalie Reyes, Daniel said, his voice carefully neutral. She's helping out at the farm. Natalie, this is Melissa Carter. Her father owns the bank in town, and the car dealership, and half the rental properties, Melissa added with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Daddy likes to keep busy. Natalie nodded politely, instantly disliking the way Melissa was looking. At Daniel, Lighty was a possession she'd misplaced and just rediscovered. So, Danny, Melissa continued, ignoring Natalie now. Daddy was just saying the other day how we never see you at the country club anymore. You should come to dinner this week. I'm in town until next Sunday. Thanks, but I'm pretty busy at the farm right now, Daniel replied. Harvest season coming up. All work and no play, Melissa pouted, reaching out to touch his arm. You always were too serious. Remember how I used to help you loosen up? Natalie felt a surge of something hot and uncomfortable in her chest. Jealousy, she realized with surprise. She had no right to feel jealous Daniel wasn't hers. And yet, watching this woman touch him so casually, refer to shared memories with such intimacy, made her want to step between them. That was a long time ago, Melissa, Daniel said, gently but firmly removing her hand from his arm. Not so long, Melissa countered, her smile turning calculating. And Daddy was just saying what a shame it is about your farm. All that prime land, struggling to turn a profit. She lowered her voice, though not enough that Natalie couldn't hear. You know his offer still stands. Carter Development would pay top dollar, and you wouldn't have to work so hard anymore. Daniel's expression hardened. The farm's not for sale. Never has been. Never will be. Everyone has a price. Danny, Melissa said with a laugh that grated on Natalie's nerves, even you, especially when the bank holds your mortgage. She glanced at her watch, an expensive-looking thing that glinted in the sunlight. I should run, Daddy's expecting me for lunch. Think about dinner, won't you, for old time's sake? With a final smile that didn't reach her eyes and a dismissive glance at Natalie, Melissa walked away, drawing looks from several male vendors as she passed. Sorry about that, Daniel said once she was out of earshot. Old girlfriend, Natalie asked, trying to sound casual. High school, Daniel admitted. And briefly after Sarah left. Not my proudest moment. She seems confident. Daniel laughed, the tension leaving his shoulders. That's a polite way of putting it. Melissa Carter has wanted Wild Creek Farm since her father got it in his head to build a resort community in the area. They've been trying to buy out local farmers for years. Would you ever sell? Natalie asked, suddenly worried about the home she'd begun to think of as her own. Never, Daniel said firmly. That land has been in my family for 3 generations. I intend to keep it that way. The rest of the market passed without incident. By early afternoon, they had sold almost everything they'd brought and were packing up the truck to head home. That wasn't so bad, was it? Daniel asked as they drove back to the farm. Meeting the neighbors. They were nice, Natalie said truthfully, except for Melissa. Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Melissa's always been ... complicated. She likes getting what she wants, and she's not used to hearing no. It seems like she wants you, Natalie observed, watching his profile. Daniel glanced at her, then back at the road. What she wants is the farm. And maybe the idea of meet a hometown boy she can reform into something more suited to her lifestyle. And what lifestyle is that? Country club memberships, charity galas, vacations in Europe. He shook his head. Everything I'm not interested in. What are you interested in? Natalie asked softly. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Simple things. Good work that means something. Land that's cared for properly. Animals that are treated with respect. He paused, then added, someone to share it all with. Someone who sees the value in this life. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Back at the farm, they unloaded the truck in comfortable silence. The day's sales had been good, better than usual, Daniel admitted, and they treated themselves to ice cream on the porch as the sun began to set. I had fun today, Natalie said, licking her spoon. It felt good to be part of something, to contribute. You're always contributing, Daniel told her. Every day, in ways you don't even realize. Natalie looked at him curiously. What do you mean? Daniel seemed suddenly shy, focusing on his ice cream rather than meeting her eyes. Before you came, this place was just where I worked. Now it feels like a home again. The simple honesty of his words touched something deep inside Natalie. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she felt truly needed, not for what she could provide materially, but for who she was and the difference her presence made. That night, as Natalie prepared for bed, she heard a soft knock at her door. Opening it, she found Daniel standing there, looking uncertain. Everything okay? She asked. Fine, he assured her quickly. Just wanted to give you this. He handed her an envelope. Today's market earnings, your share. Natalie looked at the envelope in surprise. My share? You helped grow the vegetables, collected the eggs, worked the stand, Daniel said simply. You earned it. Natalie opened the envelope to find several bills inside, more money than she'd had since leaving Seattle. Daniel, I can't. You can, he interrupted gently. It's not charity, Natalie. It's what you're owed for your work and ... He hesitated. I set up an account for you at the bank, not Carter's bank, he added quickly. The credit union in the next town over, somewhere you can start saving for whatever you decide to do next. Natalie stared at him, tears suddenly threatening. The gesture was so thoughtful, so respectful of her independence, that it left her speechless. Thank you, she managed finally. Daniel nodded, his eyes warm in the hallway's dim light. Get some sleep. Church, tomorrow, if you want to come. Church. No pressure, he said quickly, but it's sort of expected around here. Small town tradition. I'd like to come, Natalie said, surprising herself. She hadn't been to church since she was a child, dragged along by parents who cared more about appearances than faith. But the idea of sitting beside Daniel in a quiet sanctuary, being part of something larger than herself, appealed to her in a way she hadn't expected. Good night then, Daniel said softly. Good night, Daniel. After he left, Natalie sat on the edge of her bed, the envelope still in her hands. The money represented more than just payment for work. It was Daniel's way of honoring her dignity, of showing her that he saw her as an equal partner in this life they were building day by day. The next morning, Natalie wore one of Emma's dresses, again a simple blue one that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. Daniel, dressed in clean jeans and a button-down shirt, looked different, somehow still the same hard-working farmer, but with an air of quiet dignity that made Natalie's heart beat a little faster. The small white church in Millfield was packed, with familiar faces from the farmer's market. Mrs. Jenkins waved enthusiastically from her pew, and several other neighbors smiled in welcome. If anyone found it noteworthy that Daniel Wilde had brought a woman to church for the first time in years, they were polite enough not to stare openly. The service was simple but heartfelt. The pastor spoke about community, about bearing one another's the burdens, about the sacred duty of caring for those in need. Natalie found herself unexpectedly moved by the message, seeing in it echoes of what Daniel had done for her, taken her in when she had nothing, asked for nothing in return except the chance to help her heal after the service. They were invited to the monthly potluck lunch in the church basement. Natalie felt a moment of panic. She had brought nothing to share, but Daniel assured her that no one would mind. Besides, he added with a smile, you can bring your famous apple pie next time. Next time, the words implied a future, a continued belonging to this community. Natalie held onto them like a promise as they made their way through the crowded basement, accepting plates piled high with fried chicken, potato salad, and homemade rolls. Daniel Wilde, introduce me properly to this lovely young woman, a deep voice boomed. The pastor, a tall man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair, stood before them with a warm smile. Pastor Mike, this is Natalie Reyes, Daniel said. Natalie, this is Michael Thompson, who's been trying to save my soul since I was a teenager, and making very little progress. The pastor laughed, shaking Natalie's hand. Welcome to Millfield, Natalie. We're glad to have you here. Thank you, Natalie said, touched by the simple welcome. Daniel tells me you've been a godsend at the farm, Pastor Mike continued. Lord knows that place is too much for one person, no matter how stubborn that person might be. He gave Daniel a pointed look. I'm learning a lot, Natalie said truthfully. Daniel's a patient teacher. I'll bet he is, the pastor said with a knowing smile that made both of them blush. Well, don't let me keep you from Mrs. Wilson's fried chicken. It's legendary for a reason. As they found seats at one of the long tables, Natalie was struck by how easily she fit into this world that had been foreign to her just weeks ago. The simple rhythms of farm life, the tight-knit community, the straightforward faith of these people, it all spoke to something in her that had been starved for genuine connection. "You okay?" Daniel asked quietly, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Better than okay," Natalie assured him, "just happy, I think." The word felt strange on her tongue, feeling she'd almost forgotten was possible. But sitting there in that church basement, surrounded by the warm chatter of neighbors and the comfort of Daniel's presence beside her, Natalie realized it was true. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was genuinely happy. The rest of the day passed in peaceful contentment. They returned to the farm in the afternoon, changed into work clothes, and completed the daily chores together. As the sun began to set, they took Sadie for a walk along the creek that gave the farm its name. The water burbled pleasantly over smooth stones, catching the golden light of the setting sun. Wildflowers nodded in the gentle breeze, and birds called to each other from the trees that lined the banks. "It's beautiful here," Natalie said, stopping to watch the water flow past. "So peaceful." "This was always my favorite spot," Daniel told her, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Used to come here as a kid when I needed to think. Later, when my parents died, I'd sit here for hours, trying to make sense of it." "All did you make sense of it?" Daniel shook his head. "Not really, but being here helped somehow. Like the creek was saying, life goes on. Keep flowing." Natalie nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. They stood in companionable silence, watching the water, each lost in their own thoughts yet acutely aware of the other's presence. "Daniel," Natalie said finally, gathering her courage. "What Melissa said yesterday, about the farm struggling, is that true?" Daniel sighed, his expression clouding. "Things have been tight the last few years," he admitted. "Bad weather, equipment breaking down, prices dropping. It's been hard to keep up." "Is the bank really threatening to foreclose?" "Not yet," Daniel said, though his tone wasn't entirely convincing. "But if things don't turn around soon, Carter's been waiting for a chance to get his hands on this land. He'd love nothing more than to see me fail." "Why?" Natalie asked, genuinely puzzled. "What did you ever do to him?" "Turned down his daughter," Daniel said with a humorless laugh, "twice, and refused to sell him the creek frontage he wanted for his resort project. Frank Carter isn't used to hearing no any more than Melissa is." Natalie felt a surge of protectiveness. The thought of Daniel losing his family's land, this beautiful place that was so much a part of him, was unbearable. "There must be something we can do," she said firmly. "Some way to increase revenue or cut costs." Daniel looked at her, surprise and gratitude mingling in his expression. Yes, we," Natalie said decisively. "I may not know much about farming, but I know marketing. That's what I did in Seattle. Remember, maybe we can find new markets for your produce or add value somehow." For the first time since she'd met him, Daniel's face showed a glimmer of real hope. "You'd do that? Help me save the farm?" "Of course I would," Natalie said softly. "You saved me, didn't you?" Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Daniel took a half step closer, his hand reaching for hers. "Natalie, isn't this cozy?" A cold voice interrupted. They turned to find Melissa Carter standing on the path behind them, her expensive shoes incongruous on the dirt trail, her smile sharp as a knife. "Melissa," Daniel said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" "Daddy sent me to deliver this personally," she said, holding out an envelope. "He thought you might appreciate the gesture." Daniel took the envelope warily, opening it to reveal an official-looking letter as he read. His face paled. "What is it?" Natalie asked, alarmed by his expression. "They're calling in the loan," Daniel said, his voice hollow. 90 days to pay in full or they foreclose." Melissa's smile widened. "Nothing personal, Danny. Just business. Of course, Daddy's offer to buy the property still stands. He'd even let you keep the farmhouse as a tenant, naturally." The cruelty in her voice made Natalie's blood boil. Without thinking, she stepped forward, placing herself between Daniel and Melissa. "He's not selling." Melissa looked Natalie up and down, her contempt obvious. "And who are you to decide that?" "The hired help. The charity case he picked up. Do you have any idea what this farm is worth?" "I know exactly what it's worth," Natalie replied, her voice steady despite the anger coursing through her. "And it's not about the money." "It's always about the money, honey," Melissa sneered. "Danny will figure that out eventually. The wild, stubborn streak only goes so far against bank paperwork." "Get off my property," Melissa, Daniel said quietly, his voice controlled but dangerous. Melissa shrugged, unperturbed by his anger, just delivering the message. "Daddy thought you deserved to hear it from family." "We're not family," Daniel bet out. "Not yet," Melissa agreed with a cold smile. "But when you're broke and desperate in 3 months, you might reconsider my dinner invitation. I've always had a soft spot for you, Danny. I'm sure we could work something out." With that parting shot, she turned and walked back up the path, leaving Daniel and Natalie standing in stunned silence when she was gone. Daniel crumpled the letter in his fist, his face a mask of anger and despair. 90 days, he he said, his voice rough with emotion. How am I supposed to come up with that kind of money in 90 days? Natalie placed her hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. We'll figure it out, she promised. Together. Daniel looked down at her, his eyes searching her face. Why would you do that? This isn't your fight, Natalie. You could walk away. Start fresh somewhere else. I don't want to start fresh somewhere else, Natalie said, the truth of the words hitting her as she spoke them. I want to be here, with you, fighting for this place. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, despair giving way to determination, fear to hope. Slowly he reached out to touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. With me, he asked softly. With you, Natalie confirmed, her heart racing at his touch. In the golden light of sunset, with the sound of the creek beside them and the threat of loss hanging over their heads, Daniel bent down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, questioning at first, then deepening as Natalie responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and a little stunned by what had just happened, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, Natalie Reyes, he whispered, and I'm terrified it's happening right when I might lose everything. You won't lose everything, Natalie promised, her voice fierce with conviction. Not the farm, and not me. I'm staying right here, Daniel Wild, no matter what comes next. As they walked back to the farmhouse hand in hand, the letter from the bank still crumpled in Daniel's fist, Natalie knew they faced an uphill battle. Saving Wild Creek Farm from Frank Carter's greedy hands wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in her life she had found someone worth fighting for, and she wasn't about to let go without a fight. The morning after Melissa's visit, Daniel and Natalie sat at the kitchen table with coffee and a notepad, facing the reality of their situation. The bank letter lay between them, its official language spelling out the threat in no uncertain terms. 90 days to pay the outstanding balance of the loan or face foreclosure. It's a lot of money, Daniel admitted, running a hand through his hair. More than I could hope to make in 3 months of regular farming. Natalie studied the numbers, her marketing mind already calculating possibilities. We need to think outside the box, she said. What does Wild Creek Farm have that other farms don't? Daniel looked around, as if seeing his home through new eyes. The creek is pretty special. The land's been organic for 3 generations. My grandfather never believed in chemicals, even before organic was trendy. The honey from our bees wins ribbons at the county fair every year. That's a start, Natalie said encouragingly. What about the farmhouse itself? It's beautiful, historic, but been in the family since my great-grandfather built it in 1922, Daniel said with pride. Not much has changed since then, except the plumbing and electricity. An idea began to form in Natalie's mind. Daniel, have you ever thought about agritourism? It's when farms open up to visitors offering experiences, not just products. Farm tours, pick your own produce, workshops, even farm stays for city people wanting to experience country life. Daniel frowned skeptically. People would pay to pick their own vegetables. To collect eggs, that's just work. Exactly, Natalie said with growing excitement. Work that feels like an adventure to people who spend their days in offices. They'd love especially families with kids who've never seen a chicken or pulled a carrot from the ground. I don't know, Daniel said, still uncertain. Sounds like a lot of strangers tramping around the farm. Not if we manage it right, Natalie insisted. We could start small, maybe weekend farm tours and a pick-your-own berry patch. Then, if it works, expand to workshop spread baking jam, making beekeeping. Daniel's frown was easing curiosity, replacing doubt. You really think people would pay for that? I know they would, Natalie said confidently. In Seattle, people were always looking for authentic experiences, connections to where their food comes from. And we're only 2 hours from the city, close enough for day trips or weekends. Daniel asked, a smile tugging at his lips. Natalie blushed, realizing how naturally she'd included herself in the farm's future. Well, if you want my help, I want more than your help, Natalie, Daniel said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I want you to be part of this, part of everything. The warmth in his eyes made her heart skip. Last night's kiss by the creek had changed something between them, bringing feelings to the surface that could no longer be ignored. But morning had brought with it not just the reality of the bank's threat, but also the questions Natalie had been avoiding. Daniel, she said softly, before we go any further, there's something I need to tell you about why I left Seattle. Daniel squeezed her hand. You don't have to explain anything. I do, she insisted. If we're going to try to save this place together, if we're going to be shit-stated together, you deserve the whole truth. Daniel nodded, his expression open and free of judgment. I'm listening. Natalie took a deep breath, steadying herself. I told you about losing my job, about James cheating. But that wasn't all. She looked down at their joined hands, finding courage in his steady grip. After James and I broke up, I was a mess. Couldn't find work, couldn't afford my own place. I stayed with a friend for a while, but that fell through too. She paused, the shame of those dark days washing over her again. I ended up sleeping in my car for 2 weeks. Then it got repossessed because I couldn't make the payments. Daniel's grip on her hand tightened, but he remained silent, letting her tell her story. I was desperate. A woman I knew from my old job offered me a place to stay, said she'd help me get back on my feet. Natalie's voice hardened. Turned out she was recruiting for her boyfriend's business, a high-end escort service. Daniel's intake of breath was sharp, but still he didn't interrupt. I didn't do it, Natalie said quickly, needing him to understand. When I realized what she was offering, I left. But by then, I was truly homeless. No car, no phone, just the clothes I could carry in a backpack. Tears welled in her eyes as she remembered those terrifying days. I spent a few nights in a shelter, but it wasn't safe, so I took what little money I had left and got on a bus. Just wanted to get as far away as possible. She finally looked up to meet Daniel's gaze, fearful of what she might see there. But instead of disgust or judgment, his eyes held only compassion and a steady warmth that gave her the courage to continue. The bus dropped me about 10 miles from here. I walked the rest of the way, no particular destination in mind, just following the road, hoping to find some place to start over. A small smile touched her lips. And then I saw your farm. Something about it called to me the fields, the old house, the wooden fence. I stood there for almost an hour before I worked up the courage to knock. I'm glad you did, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. Even now, Natalie asked, searching his face, knowing everything. Especially now, Daniel said firmly. Natalie, we've all got parts of our past we're not proud of. Moments when life knocked us down. What matters is that you got back up. You kept your dignity, your principles, even when it would have been easier not to. Relief washed over her at his words. She'd been carrying the weight of those shameful days for so long, certain that anyone who knew the truth would see her differently. Thank you, she whispered, for understanding. Nothing to understand, Daniel said simply. Nothing to forgive. You're the strongest person I know, Natalie Reyes, and if you think we can save this farm with your agritourism idea, then I believe you. The faith in his eyes gave Natalie a renewed sense of purpose. This man who had given her shelter when she had nothing, who had seen worth in her when she couldn't see it in herself, now needed her help, and she was determined not to let him down. We'll need a plan, she said, wiping away her tears and pulling the notepad closer. A website, social media, maybe even some simple brochures we can leave in local businesses. Daniel watched her with admiration as she began to sketch out ideas, her marketing experience coming to the fore. You're really good at this, he observed. It's what I did before, she reminded him. Only now, instead of selling tech products no one really needs, I'm promoting something that matters, something real. They spent the morning brainstorming ideas for Wild Creek Farm's new direction. By lunchtime, they had a rough plan. They would start with weekend farm tours and a U-pick berry patch using the existing blueberry bushes at the edge of the property. They'd add workshops on bread baking, jam making, and beekeeping, leveraging Daniel's skills and the farm's resources. And eventually, if things went well, they might convert the old barn loft into a rustic vacation rental. It's not going to be easy, Daniel cautioned as they prepared lunch together. There's a lot of work to do before we can welcome visitors. Good thing there are two of us. Then, Natalie said, bumping his hip playfully with her own as she reached 4 plates. The casual touch sent a jolt of awareness through both of them. Since their kiss by the creek, they'd been navigating a new dimension to their relationship, still friends and partners in the farm, but now with an undercurrent of deeper feeling that made every glance, every touch, more meaningful. Daniel set down the sandwiches he was making and turned to face her. Natalie, he said softly, about last night, ... Yes, she replied, her heart suddenly racing. I meant what I said. I am falling in love with you. His hands found her waist, drawing her closer. And not just because you're helping save the farm, because you're you, strong, smart, kind, beautiful. Natalie looked up into his eyes, seeing the truth of his words reflected there. I'm falling in love with you too, she admitted, the words both terrifying and freeing. I think maybe I started the first day, when you opened your door to a stranger and offered everything without asking for anything in return. Daniel's smile was like sunrise breaking over the fields. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he bent to kiss her. Unlike the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss by the creek, this one was gentle, a promise rather than a declaration. Natalie melted into it, her arms sliding around his neck, her body fitting perfectly against his. When they finally parted, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. Whatever happens with the farm, he whispered, this is what matters most. We'll save the farm, Natalie promised, and us. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. During the days, they worked side by side to prepare the farm for visitors, clearing paths, building a simple stand for the berry patch, cleaning and organizing the barn for future workshops. In the evenings, Natalie worked on creating a website and social media accounts for Wild Creek Farm. Using her marketing skills to craft compelling stories about the farm's history and organic practices, word began to spread through the community about their plans. To Natalie's surprise, their neighbors were enthusiastic and supportive. Mrs. Jenkins offered to teach quilting workshops in the farmhouse kitchen. The high school shop teacher volunteered to help build picnic tables for visitors. Pastor Mike mentioned the new farm tours in the church bulletin, encouraging parishioners to spread the word. I had no idea people would be so willing to help, Daniel said one evening as they reviewed the list of volunteers who had offered their time and skills. That's what community means, Natalie replied. Something I never really understood until I came here as they worked. Their relationship deepened. Natalie moved from Emma's old room to Daniel's, their love growing naturally from friendship to intimacy. In his arms at night, she found a sense of belonging she'd never known before, and in her presence, Daniel found the partnership he'd always longed for, someone who shared not just his bed but his vision, his work, his life. 3 weeks after they'd begun their plan, Wild Creek Farm hosted its first official visitors, a small group of families from Millfield and the surrounding towns, invited for a preview of the farm tours. Natalie had suggested the soft opening as a way to practice, before welcoming paying customers from further afield. The day dawned clear and bright. Perfect weather for showing off the farm at its best. Natalie had prepared simple brochures highlighting the farm's history and organic practices, while Daniel had mapped out a route that would showcase the vegetable gardens, chicken coop, beehives, and berry patch. Nervous? Natalie asked as they waited for the first cars to arrive. A little, Daniel admitted. Never thought I'd be talking to strangers about farming. Always just did it. You'll be great, Natalie assured him, straightening the collar of his clean flannel shirt. Just share what you love about this place. That passion is what people want to experience. Daniel caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Have I told you today how amazing you are? Only twice, Natalie teased. But who's counting? The sound of cars coming up the driveway interrupted their moment. Daniel squeezed her hand once more, then turned to greet their visitors with a smile that held only a hint of his earlier nervousness. To Natalie's delight, the day was a resounding success. The children squealed with excitement when collecting eggs from the chicken coop, their parents snapping photos and asking questions about organic farming practices. Everyone loved the berry patch, filling baskets with plump blueberries and sampling them right off the bush. But the real highlight came when Daniel took the group to see the beehives. Wearing his beekeeper's suit and veil, he captivated everyone with his knowledge of bees and their crucial role in the ecosystem. When he carefully extracted a frame of honeycomb from one of the hives, showing the busy workers inside, even the adults gasped in wonder. Who wants to taste honey straight from the hive? Daniel asked, his earlier shyness completely gone. The enthusiasm in his voice, the obvious love he had for his work, drew everyone in. As Natalie watched him demonstrate how to use a small wooden dipper to taste the fresh honey, her heart swelled with pride and love. This was the Daniel she'd come to know over the past months, capable, knowledgeable, quietly passionate about the land and creatures in his care. Seeing others recognize those qualities only confirmed what she already knew. Daniel Wild was an extraordinary man. At the end of the tour, several families purchased jars of honey and fresh eggs, thanking Daniel and Natalie enthusiastically for the experience. As the last car pulled away down the driveway, Daniel turned to Natalie with an expression of wonder. They loved it, he said, sounding almost surprised. They actually paid money to walk around my farm and do things I've done every day of my life. Natalie laughed, slipping her arms around his waist. Told you so. And this is just the beginning. Wait until we get city folks out here, they'll be even more amazed. Daniel bent to kiss her, his arms tightening around her. You're a genius, Natalie Reyes. Just practical, she demurred, and I happen to believe in this place in you. The success of the preview day gave them renewed energy for their plans. Natalie finalized the website and created social media accounts for the farm, posting photos from their first tour along with the announcement that Wild Creek Farm would officially open for weekend visits starting the following Saturday. To her delight, the posts received immediate attention, with comments and inquiries pouring in from people in Seattle and other nearby cities within days. They had bookings for all the available tour slots for the next 3 weekends. Natalie also began scheduling workshops: bread baking with Daniel, quilting with Mrs. Jenkins, and beekeeping basics, which would include a jar of Wild Creek honey for each participant. I can't believe how quickly this is happening, Daniel said as they sat on the porch one evening, reviewing the growing list of reservations. At this rate, we might actually be able to make a dent in what we owe the bank. We will, Natalie assured him, and I've been thinking about other revenue streams too. We could package and sell your honey with a special Wild Creek Farm label. Maybe add jam made from our berries. People love taking home souvenirs from places they visit. Daniel nodded, but she could see worry still lingering in his eyes. What is it? She asked gently. Just thinking about what happens if this isn't enough, he admitted. The loan payment is substantial, Natalie. Even with all these bookings, we'd need a miracle to pay it off completely in the time we have left. Natalie took his hand, understanding his fear. Then we'll figure something else out. Maybe refinance with another bank. Or look for investors who believe in what we're doing here. Not the Carters, Daniel said firmly. Definitely not the Carters, Natalie agreed. But there must be other options. people who would support sustainable organic farming without wanting to turn it into a resort. Daniel squeezed her hand gratefully. How did I get so lucky? Finding you, I'm the lucky one, Natalie countered softly. You gave me a home when I had nothing. Now I get to help protect yours. As the days passed and their deadline drew closer, Wild Creek Farm transformed. The weekend tours were consistently sold out, with visitors coming from as far as Portland. The workshops filled up almost as soon as they were announced. Natalie's idea of selling honey and jam with custom labels was a hit, with guests eager to take home a taste of the farm. They worked harder than either had ever worked before rising. Before dawn to complete the regular farm chores before visitors arrived, spending evenings preparing for the next day's activities, often falling into bed exhausted but satisfied with their progress, and through it all their love deepened. Daniel found himself watching Natalie as she charmed visitors with her warm welcome, or bent over her laptop updating their social media accounts, or simply stood watching the sunset from their porch and wondering how he'd ever lived without her. The farm that had once been merely his responsibility, his burden to bear alone, had become a shared joy, a project they built together day by day. But for Natalie, the transformation was even more profound. The woman who had arrived at Wild Creek Farm with nothing but desperation and a stubborn will to survive had found not just shelter, but purpose. The skills she'd honed in her corporate career marketing organization, people management, now served a cause she believed in wholeheartedly. And in Daniel, she'd found a partner who valued her not for what she could provide, but for who she was at her core. But when this falls apart, and it will, don't come looking for me. As she stalked back to her car, Maria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Lucas put his arm around her waist, pulling her close. I'm sorry about that, he said. Don't be, Maria replied. She doesn't matter. We do. They watched Isabella drive away and Lucas pressed a kiss to Maria's temple. You're right. We're what matters. And tomorrow, after the surgery, we'll start planning our future. But as the next day would prove, the future had other plans for them. Plans that would test their love and their strength in ways they never could have imagined. The morning of Lucas's surgery dawned clear and bright. Maria woke early, making sure everything was ready for their trip to the hospital. Lucas was quiet as she helped him into the car, his face tight with pain. It's going to be fine, she assured him, squeezing his hand. This is a simple procedure, and then you'll be on the road to full recovery. Lucas nodded, trying to smile for her sake. I know, I just hate hospitals. At the hospital, the nurses prepared Lucas for surgery while Maria filled out paperwork. The doctor assured her that the procedure would take less than an hour, and Lucas would be able to go home the same day. I'll be right here waiting when you come out, she promised. Kissing Lucas before they wheeled him away in the waiting room, Maria paced nervously. Despite the doctor's assurances, she couldn't help worrying. She called Miguel to check on things at the vineyard, mostly to distract herself. Everything's fine here, Miguel told her. How's Lucas? In surgery now, she replied. He should be out soon. Tell him not to worry about anything here. Alina and I have everything under control. Maria smiled, grateful for their support. I will thank you, Miguel. An hour passed, then two. Maria's anxiety grew with each passing minute. Finally, the doctor appeared, still in his surgical scrubs. Ms. Escarella, he called, and Maria rushed over. How is he? Can I see him? The doctor's serious expression sent a chill through her. There were complications during the procedure. When we went to fix the rib, we discovered internal bleeding that hadn't been detected before. It appears there was more damage from the original accident than we realized. Maria's heart raced. But he's okay, right? He's going to be fine. We've stopped the bleeding and repaired the damage, but he lost a significant amount of blood. He's stable now, but he'll need to stay in the hospital for several days, possibly a week, for observation. Maria sank into a nearby chair, her legs suddenly weak. Can I see him? He's in recovery now. Once he's moved to a room, you can go in. It will be a couple of hours. Those hours were the longest of Maria's life. She called Miguel again to update him, then sat quietly, trying to process everything. Lucas had been more seriously injured than anyone had realized. He could have been bleeding internally all this time. Finally, a nurse came to lead her to Lucas's room. He looked pale and small in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and an IV. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady. Maria sat beside him, gently taking his hand in hers. I'm here, Lucas, she whispered. I'm right here. His eyelids fluttered, and slowly he opened his eyes. It took him a moment to focus on her face. Maria, he murmured, his voice weak. Don't try to talk, she said softly. Everything's going to be fine. The doctor had to do a bit more than they planned, but you're going to be okay. Lucas squeezed her hand weakly. How bad is it? You had some internal bleeding they didn't catch before. They've fixed it now, but you need to stay in the hospital for a few days. Frustration flickered across his face. The buyers are coming next week. The new vintage will be fine, Maria interrupted gently. Miguel and I will handle everything. Your only job is to rest and get better. Lucas's eyes were already drifting closed again, the medication making him drowsy. I love you, he murmured. Love you too, Maria replied, watching as he fell back to sleep. For the next 3 days, Maria barely left the hospital. She slept in the uncomfortable chair beside Lucas's bed, only going home to shower and change clothes. Lucas improved steadily, regaining his strength and color. By the 4th day, he was sitting up complaining about the hospital food and asking for updates on the vineyard. The bottling is complete, Maria told him. The first tastings with the distributors went well. Miguel says they're very interested in the new vintage. That's good, Lucas said, clearly relieved. And the estate, any problems? Maria Isita Tate. Well, there is one thing. Isabella came by yesterday. Lucas frowned. What did she want this time? She was actually helpful, Maria admitted reluctantly. She brought the financial records you needed to sign for the bank loan. Said her father knows the bank president and can help expedite the approval process. I don't want her help, Lucas said firmly. I know, Maria replied. But Miguel said, the loan is important for cash flow until the wine sales start coming in. He suggested we might need to set aside personal feelings for the good of Vallecir. No. Lucas was quiet for a moment, considering you're right, the estate has to come first. But I don't trust Isabella's sudden helpfulness. Neither though, Maria agreed. But Miguel is looking over everything carefully. We won't let her take advantage of the situation. Lucas reached for her hand. What would I do without you? You've taken on so much responsibility, Maria smiled. That's what partners do. We carry each other when needed. The following day, the doctor declared Lucas well enough to go home, though he would need to continue resting and avoid any strenuous activity for at least a month. No working in the vineyard, no lifting anything heavier than a coffee cup, and absolutely no stress, the doctor instructed. Your body needs time to heal completely. Lucas didn't argue, which told Maria just how serious his condition had been. The normally stubborn, independent man was finally accepting that he needed to take care of himself at home. Maria settled Lucas in the bedroom with books, his laptop for necessary business correspondence, and strict instructions to rest. Alina came daily to help with cooking and cleaning, and Miguel visited every evening with updates on the vineyard operations. A week after Lucas returned home, Maria was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard a car approaching. Looking out the window, she saw Isabella's sleek vehicle pulling up. What now? She muttered to herself, wiping her hands on a towel and going to the door. Isabella looked unusually serious as she approached. I need to speak with Lucas, she said without preamble. It's important, he's resting, Maria replied, blocking the doorway. Doctor's orders. This can't wait, Isabella insisted. It's about the estate, the bank loan. Maria Citatided then reluctantly stepped aside. He's in the bedroom, but if you upset him, I'm taking you out of there myself. Isabella actually smiled slightly at the threat. Understood. Maria led her to the bedroom where Lucas was propped up on pillows reading. He looked up in surprise when he saw Isabella. What's going on? He asked, his eyes moving from Isabella to Maria. Letters. Isabella says she has important news about the bank loan, Maria explained. I told her you're supposed to be resting, but she insisted it couldn't wait. Lucas sat up straighter, wincing slightly at the movement. Go ahead, Isabella. What's so urgent? Isabella took a deep breath. My father found out that the loan is about to be denied. The bank has concerns about Vallecireno's ability to repay based on the last 2 years' financials. Lucas paled. That can't be right. With this year's harvest and the pre-orders from distributors, the bank doesn't see it that way. Isabella interrupted. They're looking at the past, not the future potential. What does your father have to do with this? Maria asked suspiciously. Isabella glanced at her. He sits on the bank's board. He heard about the pending denial in yesterday's meeting. Lucas's face hardened, and let me guess he's willing to help if I reconsider his investment offer. To Maria's surprise, Isabella shook her head. No, actually, he's already intervened on your behalf. The loan will be approved. No strings attached. Lucas looked skeptical. Why would he do that? Isabella was quiet for a moment, then said, because I asked him to. She paused, then continued more softly. Lucas, I know I've behaved badly. I've been jealous. When I heard about your accident, and then the complications with the surgery. Her voice faltered. I realized some things matter more than pride or getting what you want. Maria watched Isabella carefully, trying to determine if this was another manipulation. But the woman's usual perfect composure had slipped, revealing what seemed like genuine emotion. Thank you, Lucas said finally. That was unexpectedly kind. Isabella nodded, regaining her composure. The loan papers will be ready next week. My father made sure the terms are favorable. She stood to leave, then hesitated. I really do hope you'll be well soon, Lucas, and congratulations on your engagement. I hope you'll both be happy. After she left, Maria sat on the edge of the bed. Do you believe her? She asked. Lucas considered for a moment. Strangely, yes. I asked the council to dismiss this complaint and affirm our right to continue these activities under the existing agricultural zoning laws. A murmur of approval ran through the crowd as Daniel finished speaking. Several people began to applaud, and others quickly joined in until the entire room was filled with the sound of clapping hands and supportive voices. Frank Carter's face darkened with anger. He leaned forward to speak into his microphone. "This is all very touching," he said, his voice cutting through the applause. "But sentiment doesn't change the law. The fact is, Wild Creek Farm is operating a commercial enterprise on land zoned for agricultural use. The regulations Mr. Wildsites apply to occasional farm tours, not the scale of operation they've developed." "That's not true," a voice called. From the back of the room, heads turned to see who had spoken. A tall, elderly man was making his way down the aisle, leaning on a cane. "And Frank Carter knows it's not true." Judge Wilson, the council president, acknowledged with respect. "Did you wish to address the council?" "I do indeed," the old man said, reaching the front of the room. "As the former county judge and someone who helped draft those very zoning laws 30 years ago, I can tell you with absolute certainty that they were intended to allow exactly the kind of activities Wild Creek Farm is conducting." A buzz of excitement ran through the crowd. Judge Wilson had been retired for years, but his reputation for fairness and integrity remained undiminished. "The purpose of the agricultural zoning designation," the judge continued, "was to protect farmland from development while allowing farmers to diversify their income through related activities. Farm tours, educational workshops, direct sales of farm products, these were explicitly permitted to ensure the economic viability of family farms." He turned to face Frank Carter directly. "And I find it particularly galling to hear these regulations misrepresented by someone who has repeatedly sought to circumvent them for his own profit." Frank Carter's face flushed with anger. "Now see here." "No, you see here," Judge Wilson interrupted, his voice still strong despite his age. "I've watched you try to buy up every piece of farmland in this county for your development schemes. I've seen you pressure farmers, manipulate zoning boards, and now apparently misuse banking regulations to further your own interests. It stops here, Frank." The council president cleared her throat. "Judge Wilson, do you have documentation to support your interpretation of the zoning laws?" "I do indeed," the judge replied, pulling papers from his jacket pocket, the original draft with my own notes, and minutes from the meetings where these provisions were discussed. I've kept them all these years, knowing they might be needed someday. As Judge Wilson presented his documents to the council, Natalie slipped out of her seat to stand beside Daniel. "Did you know he was going to do this?" she whispered. Daniel shook his head, looking as surprised as she felt. "No idea, but I'm not complaining." After reviewing the documents, the council president called for a vote. One by one, the council members voted to dismiss the complaint against Wild Creek Farm, with only Frank Carter dissenting. The crowd erupted in cheers as the decision was announced. Frank Carter stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. "This isn't over," he said, loud enough for Daniel and Natalie to hear, before storming out of the room with Melissa trailing behind him. But his departure was barely noticed amid the celebration. Neighbors surrounded Daniel and Natalie, offering congratulations and support. Mrs. Jenkins hugged them both, declaring it the best council meeting in 20 years. Pastor Mike shook Daniel's hand vigorously, promising to announce their victory. In Sunday service, Judge Wilson made his way through the crowd to reach them. "Well done, young man," he said, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud." "Thank you, sir," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you for stepping in like that." "No repayment necessary," the judge said with a smile. "Martha Wild brought me chicken soup every week after my Eleanor passed. Some debts can never be fully repaid, we just pass them forward." He turned to Natalie, his eyes twinkling. "And you must be the young lady who's helped bring Wild Creek Farm into the modern age. Martha would have liked you." "That's what Daniel says," Natalie replied, smiling through the tears that threatened to spill. "I wish I could have met her. She's here in spirit," the judge assured her. "In every corner of that farm, in the man Daniel has become." He patted her hand. "Now, about this harvest festival I've been hearing about, count me in for a booth. I make a mean apple butter, if I do say so myself." As they drove home that night, the relief of their victory was tempered by the knowledge that they'd won only one battle. The bank loan still loomed, and Frank Carter wasn't a man who accepted defeat gracefully. "He'll try something else," Daniel said as they turned onto the road leading to the farm. "Carter doesn't give up, Neither do we," Natalie reminded him. When they reached the farmhouse, Daniel cut the engine but made no move to get out of the truck. Instead, he turned to Natalie, taking both her hands in his. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice serious in the darkness. "What is it?" Natalie asked, her heart suddenly racing. "What happens if we lose the farm?" The question caught her off guard. "We won't," she said automatically. "The harvest festival, but if we do," Daniel persisted. "If Carter finds another way, if we can't raise the money in time, what then?" Natalie studied his face in the moonlight filtering through the windshield. "Then we start over," she said simply. "Together you'd stay with me, even without the farm." "Daniel Wild," Natalie said, squeezing his hands tightly. "I didn't fall in love with you because of this land. I love this place because it's part of you. But you're what matters, not the farm, not the house, not any of it. Daniel's expression softened, relief and love, washing away the worry that had creased his brow. I needed to hear that, he admitted, because I realized something today, watching you in that town meeting, seeing how everyone has come to care for you the way I do. This place, it's just land and buildings. Home is wherever you are, Natalie. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. This was my grandmother's, he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. She left it to me, said I should give it to the woman who brought light back to Wild Creek. Natalie's breath caught in her throat as Daniel slipped from his seat to kneel awkwardly in the confined space of the truck cab. Natalie Reyes, he said, his voice steady, despite the emotion shining in his eyes. Will you marry me, whether we save this farm or lose everything? Will you build a life with me? Tears spilled down Natalie's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Yes, she finally managed, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, Daniel, no matter what happens. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and hope and promise of their future together. When they finally separated, both breathless and a little dazed, Natalie looked down at the ring glinting in the moonlight. It's perfect, she whispered. Grandma would be so happy it's yours, Daniel said, touching the ring gently. She always said it was meant for a woman with strength and grace. That's you, Natalie. They held each other in the quiet darkness of the truck, the farm sleeping around them, their hearts full with the commitment they had just made. Whatever came next, whether they saved Wild Creek Farm or lost it to Frank Carter's scheming, would face it together, as partners, as family. The next morning, they shared their news with Sadie first, who responded with enthusiastic tail-wagging as if she understood perfectly the importance of the moment. Then they called Emma in California, who shrieked with delight and immediately began planning a trip home to meet her future sister-in-law. She sounds wonderful, Natalie said after Daniel ended the call, the phone still warm from Emma's excited chatter. She is, Daniel agreed. You two will get along great, both stubborn as mules, smart as whips, and way too good for the men who love you. Natalie laughed, swatting his arm playfully. Speak for yourself. I think I got the better end of this deal. With renewed determination, they threw themselves into planning the Harvest Festival. Natalie designed posters and flyers, which they distributed throughout the county and in the nearby cities. Daniel worked with neighboring farmers to coordinate activities and displays. The entire community seemed to rally around them, offering will help with everything from parking logistics to food service. 2 weeks before the festival, as they were walking the property to finalize the layout, Daniel's phone rang. He answered, his expression changing from curiosity to concern as he listened. Who was it? Natalie asked when he ended the call. Tom Miller from the credit union, Daniel said, looking troubled. He heard something about Carter's bank that he thought we should know. What is it? Apparently Carter's been having cash flow problems with some of his development projects. There are rumors the bank might be facing an audit from federal regulators. Natalie's eyes widened. Is that why he's been so desperate to get your land? He needs the assets. Could be, Daniel nodded. Tom thinks Carter might be willing to negotiate on our loan if he's in enough trouble. Might be worth trying to talk to him directly. Natalie considered this new information. It's worth a shot, she agreed, but let's wait until after the Harvest Festival. If we can raise enough money there, we'll be in a stronger position to negotiate. The day of the Wild Creek Harvest Festival dawned clear and crisp, a perfect early autumn day. Natalie woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Daniel, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Standing at the window with her mug, watching the first light touch the fields, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. 6 months ago, she had arrived at this farm with nothing, no money, no hope, no future. Now she stood in what had become her kitchen, in what would soon be her home by marriage, preparing to welcome hundreds of people to a festival she had helped create. The transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet it wasn't a miracle that had saved her, but the simple kindness of a good man who saw value in her when she couldn't see it in herself. And it wasn't a miracle that would save the farm, but their hard work, their community's support, and their unwavering commitment to each other. Penny, for your thoughts. Daniel's voice broke into her reverie as his arm slipped around her waist from behind. Natalie leaned back against him, savoring his warmth. Just thinking about how much has changed. How lucky I am. We're both lucky, Daniel murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. Ready for the big day. As ready as we'll ever be, Natalie replied, turning in his arms to face him. Let's go save our farm. By mid-morning, cars were lined up along the road leading to Wild Creek Farm. Daniel had enlisted the high school, a football team to direct parking in the north pasture, while Natalie and a team of volunteers manned the entrance, collecting admission fees and handing out maps of the festival grounds. The big field by the creek had been transformed. Colorful tents housed local vendors selling everything from handmade quilts to artisanal cheeses. A stage at one end featured local musicians, their melodies drifting across the festival grounds. Children laughed as they participated in old-fashioned games like sack races and apple bobbing. The air smelled of barbecue, cider donuts, and autumn leaves. In the center of it all stood the Wild Creek farm tent, where Daniel and Natalie took turns leading tour groups around the property, telling the story of the farm's past and their vision for its future. Their honey and jam sold out by noon, and the sign-up sheet for future workshops quickly filled with names. "It's going even better than I hoped," Natalie told Daniel during a rare quiet moment in the afternoon. "People love this place as much as we do." Daniel nodded, watching a group of children carefully feeding the chickens under Mrs. Jenkins' supervision. "It's like the farm has come alive again," he said thoughtfully. "Not just a place to work, but a place where people connect with the land, with their food, with each other. Exactly what your grandmother would have wanted," Natalie said softly, as the sun began to set, casting golden light across the festival grounds. Pastor Mike took the stage for the event they'd planned as the finale, an auction of donated items to benefit the farm. Local businesses had been incredibly generous, offering everything from free meals at the diner to weekend getaways at nearby cabins. Natalie held her breath as the bidding began, each item bringing them closer to their goal. By the time the last item, a handmade quilt featuring scenes from Wild Creek Farm, created by Mrs. Jenkins and her quilting circle, sold for an astonishing amount. Tears of gratitude were streaming down her face after the auction. As the festival began to wind down, Natalie was helping to clean up when she spotted a familiar figure walking toward her. It was Judge Wilson, leaning on his cane but moving with purpose. "Quite a success, my dear," he said, gesturing to the festival around them. "Martha would be proud of what you two have accomplished here." "Thank you," Natalie said sincerely. "We couldn't have done it without everyone's help." The judge nodded, his eyes twinkling. "Community is like that. When it matters, people show up." He paused, then added, "I wanted to tell you personally, I just got off the phone with an old colleague at the Banking Commission. It seems Frank Carter's bank is indeed under investigation. Nothing public yet, but serious enough that he's looking to liquidate assets quickly." Natalie's heart raced at this news. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," the judge said with a satisfied smile, "that you're in a much stronger bargaining position than you realized. Carter needs cash more than he needs your land right now. With what you've raised today and a bit of negotiation, you might just save this farm after all." Hope bloomed in Natalie's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "We need to tell Daniel," she said, looking around for her. "Tell me what?" Daniel asked, appearing beside them with perfect timing. As Judge Wilson repeated his news, Daniel's expression changed from wary hope to cautious optimism. "You think we can negotiate?" "I know you can," the judge assured him, "and I'd be happy to accompany you when you do. Frank Carter may not respect much, but he still respects the land, those who enforce it." With the judge's help and the proceeds from the Harvest Festival, they arranged a meeting with Frank Carter for the following Monday. To their surprise, he agreed to see them at his bank, his usual arrogance noticeably subdued. The meeting was brief and businesslike, with Judge Wilson's steady presence beside them and the very real threat of banking regulators hovering in the background. Frank Carter agreed to refinance the loan at favorable terms, extending the repayment period and lowering the interest rate. "Don't think this means I've given up on that land," he warned as they prepared to leave, some of his old bluster returning. "Someday you'll be ready to sell, and when you are, we won't be." Daniel interrupted firmly. "Wild Creek Farm is going to stay in the Wild family for generations to come." The victory felt surreal as they drove back to the farm. After months of worry, of working from dawn until dusk to save their home, the threat had been lifted. The farm was secure not just for now, but for the future they planned to build together. "I can hardly believe it," Natalie said as the familiar fields came into view. "We did it." Daniel reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "We did, together." As they pulled up to the farmhouse, their home, now more than ever Natalie felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. She had arrived at this place broken and desperate, seeking nothing more than a meal and a chance to work. She had found so much more: purpose, community, love, and the man she would spend her life with. Daniel helped her from the truck, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "What are you doing?" Natalie laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Carrying my future wife over the threshold," Daniel explained, climbing the porch steps. "Seems appropriate for the occasion." As he set her down in the kitchen, Natalie looked around at the warm, welcoming space they'd created together. "So what happens now?" she asked softly. "Now that the farm is safe." Daniel took her in his arms, his eyes full of love and promise. "Now," he said, "we live, we work, we build something beautiful together. And someday we'll tell our children the story of how their mother saved Wild Creek Farm." "How we saved it," Natalie corrected, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "Together." And in that moment, with the man she loved in the home they had fought for, Natalie knew she had found what she'd been searching for all her life: not just a place to belong, but someone to belong with. The journey that had begun with a desperate knock on a stranger's door had led her home in every sense of the word. Outside, the sun set over Wild Creek Farm, bathing the fields and buildings in golden light. Inside, Daniel and Natalie held each other close, their hearts full with the promise of all the tomorrows that awaited them together. 3 months had passed since the Harvest Festival that had saved Wild Creek Farm. The trees that lined the creek had shed their leaves, and the first dusting of snow had fallen overnight, transforming the farm into a winter wonderland. Natalie stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the sun rise over the white fields. The diamond on her left hand caught the morning light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the wall. So much had changed since that evening when Daniel had proposed in his old pickup truck. The farm was secure now with a new loan agreement that Frank Carter couldn't manipulate. Their agritourism business continued to thrive, with weekend workshops still selling out weeks in advance, even in the quieter winter season. And in just 3 days, on Christmas Eve, she and Daniel would be married in the small white church in Millfield. "Good morning, beautiful." Daniel's voice came from behind her as his arms slipped around her waist. He pressed a kiss to her neck, his presence warm and solid against her back. "Morning," Natalie replied, leaning into his embrace. "Sleep well. Always do with you beside me," Daniel murmured against her hair. "Ready for the big day?" "Almost," Natalie said, turning in his arms to face him. "Emma's flight gets in this afternoon. Mrs. Jenkins is bringing over the last of the decorations this morning. Just a few more details to finalize." Daniel smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that still made her heart skip. "Hard to believe it's finally happening. Sometimes I think I dreamed you up, this amazing woman who showed up on my doorstep and changed everything." "I'm the one who should be pinching myself," Natalie countered, reaching up to touch his face. "6 months ago I had nothing. Now I have everything that matters." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, savoring the moment before the day's activities began. The wedding preparations had been simple by most standards. Neither of them wanted anything elaborate, but there was still much to do before Christmas Eve. The sound of tires on the driveway broke the peaceful silence. Daniel glanced out the window, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "That's Frank Carter's car," he said, a note of wariness entering his voice. Natalie frowned. They hadn't seen or heard from Frank Carter since finalizing the new loan agreement. What could he want now, just days before their wedding? Together they went to the front door. Frank Carter was climbing out of his luxury sedan, looking strangely diminished without his usual air of arrogant confidence. He wore an expensive overcoat, but his face appeared tired, the lines around his mouth deeper than Natalie remembered. "Morning, Daniel," he called, approaching the porch with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Miss Reyes. Hope I'm not interrupting your day." "What do you want, Frank?" Daniel asked, his voice neutral but guarded. Carter cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Thought I should deliver this in person," he said, holding out an envelope. "Wedding present, of sorts." Daniel took the envelope warily, opening it while Natalie watched over his shoulder. Inside was a legal documented deed, she realized. Scanning the formal language. "What is this?" Daniel asked, confusion evident in his voice. "The creek frontage," Carter explained, gesturing toward the back of the property. "The 10 acres I've been trying to buy for years. I'm signing it over to you." Daniel and Natalie exchanged shocked glances. "Why would you do that?" Daniel asked, suspicion clear in his tone. Frank Carter shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his polished shoes before meeting Daniel's gaze again. "Call it making amends," he said finally, "for the way I've treated you, for trying to take your family's land." When Daniel remained silent, clearly waiting for more explanation, Carter sighed heavily. "The truth is, I've had some perspective changes lately. The Banking Commission's investigation has been eye-opening. Might lose my position at the bank. Definitely lost some standing in the community." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Made me think about what's really important. About the kind of legacy I want to leave, and trying to destroy a family farm that's been here for generations. Well, that's not it." Natalie studied the older man's face, searching for signs of deception. But all she saw was wariness and what appeared to be genuine regret. "What about the resort development?" Daniel asked, still cautious. Carter shook his head. "That project's dead, with the banking issues and the economy shifting. The investors pulled out." He gave a humorless laugh. "Turns out, people are more interested in places like this farm's authentic experiences than another cookie-cutter resort." Daniel looked down at the deed again, then back at Carter. "I don't know what to say, Frank." "Don't need to say anything," Carter replied. "Just take care of that land. Keep doing what you're doing here." He hesitated, then added, "And if you could find it in your hearts to let Melissa attend your Christmas festival next week, I'd appreciate it. She's going through some changes, too. Might do her good to see what you've built here." With that, he turned to go, then stopped and looked back. "Congratulations on your wedding. You'd make a good team." They watched in stunned silence as Frank Carter drove away, the unexpected gift still clutched in Daniel's hands. "Did that just happen?" Natalie asked when the car had disappeared down the driveway. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "I think it did. 10 acres of creek frontage, the most valuable part of the property. It's ours now." "Do you believe him?" Natalie asked. "About making amends?" Daniel considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "People can surprise you," he said finally. Maybe losing everything made him see what really matters. Natalie thought about her own journey, how losing everything had led her to Daniel, to this farm, to a life more meaningful than she'd ever imagined possible. Maybe it did, she agreed softly. The unexpected visit from Frank Carter was quickly forgotten in the whirlwind of activity that followed. Emma's flight arrived on time, and Daniel's sister burst into the farmhouse like a tornado of energy and affection, hugging Natalie as if they'd known each other for years instead of just meeting. "I knew from the way he talked about you that you were special," Emma declared, linking her arm through Natalie's as they showed her around the farm. "But seeing you two together, it's even better than I imagined. You belong here, Natalie." "I feel that way too," Natalie admitted, watching Daniel as he walked ahead of them, pointing out recent improvements to his sister. "Like I was always meant to find this place to find him." Emma squeezed her arm affectionately. "That's exactly what I told Mom and Dad when I talked to them last night." Natalie looked at her in surprise. "You talked to your parents?" Emma's expression softened. "In my own way, I still visit their graves when I'm in town. Tell them what's happening in our lives." She smiled sadly. "I think they know, though. Like to believe they've been watching over us, especially Danny, and that they led you here when he needed you most." The simple faith in Emma's words touched Natalie deeply. Though she hadn't been raised with strong religious beliefs, living in Millfield and working the land had awakened a spiritual sense in her, a feeling of connection to something larger than herself. The idea that Daniel's parents might somehow have guided her to their son's door was comforting in a way she couldn't quite explain. The day before the wedding dawned cold and clear. The farmhouse bustled with activity as last-minute preparations were completed. Emma and Mrs. Jenkins were in the kitchen, baking cookies for the reception. Pastor Mike stopped by to review the ceremony details. Daniel was occupied with clearing the driveway of fresh snow. Natalie took advantage of a rare, quiet moment to slip away to the creek. The water still flowed beneath a thin sheet of ice, the sound muffled but persistent. This place had become special to her, where Daniel had first kissed her, where they had committed to fighting for the farm together, where they often came to think and talk and simply be together. Now, standing on the bank with snow crunching beneath her boots, Natalie felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The journey that had brought her here had been painful at times, marked by loss and disappointment. But every step, every setback had led her exactly where she was. "It's meant to be. Thought I might find you here." Daniel's voice broke into her thoughts. He approached with Sadie bounding ahead through the snow, her black coat dotted with white flakes. "Just needed a moment," Natalie explained as he joined her, "to take it all in." Daniel nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. They stood side by side, watching Sadie investigate the frozen creek edge with canine curiosity. "Hard to believe that tomorrow, this time, we'll be married," Daniel said after a comfortable silence. "Scared?" Natalie teased, bumping his shoulder. With hers terrified, Daniel replied with mock seriousness, "Committing to one woman for the rest of my life. What was I thinking?" Natalie laughed, the sound bright in the winter stillness. "You were thinking you found someone who can make decent coffee and doesn't mind the smell of chicken manure. Pretty rare combination." Daniel turned to her, his expression shifting from playful to tender. "I was thinking I found someone who sees the world the way I do, who values what I value, who makes me laugh and think and feel more deeply than I ever have before." He took her gloved hands in his. "Someone I can't imagine living without." Natalie's heart swelled with love for this man, so steady, so genuine, so perfectly matched to her in ways she'd never thought possible. "That's what I was thinking too," she said softly. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Emma's voice calling from the direction of the farmhouse. "Lovebirds, time to get ready for the rehearsal dinner." Daniel sighed, pressing his forehead against duty calls. "Just think," Natalie whispered, "after tomorrow, we'll have the rest of our lives for moments like this." The rehearsal at the church went smoothly, followed by a warm, lively dinner at the diner in town. The owner, Betty, had closed early to host Daniel and Natalie's small wedding party. Just Emma, Mrs. Jenkins, Pastor Mike, Judge Wilson, and a few other close friends from the community. That is, they ate Betty's famous pot roast and shared stories and laughter. Natalie looked around the table at these people who had become her family in such a short time. Each one had played a role in her journey with Daniel, from Mrs. Jenkins' motherly guidance to Judge Wilson's timely intervention at the town council meeting. Together, they had helped save Wild Creek Farm. More importantly, they had welcomed Natalie into their tight-knit community with open arms and open hearts. "A toast," Judge Wilson said, raising his glass. "To Daniel and Natalie, two people who remind us all what it means to fight for what matters. May your marriage be as strong as your commitment to each other and to the land you love." "Hear, hear," the others echoed, glasses clinking around the table. Later that night, back at the farmhouse, Emma insisted on upholding the tradition of the bride and groom sleeping separately the night before the wedding. "You've got the rest of your lives to share a bed," she told them firmly. "One night apart won't kill you." So Daniel reluctantly moved to the couch, while Natalie took their bedroom. "It's silly," he grumbled as she kissed him goodnight in the hallway. "We live together already." "Humor your sister," Natalie advised with a smile. "Besides, it'll make tomorrow night that much sweeter." Sleep proved elusive as Natalie lay in the bed that seemed too big without Daniel beside her. Her mind raced, with thoughts of the wedding, of their future together, of the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been homeless and hopeless, her dreams shattered, her heart broken. Now she was about to marry the most wonderful man she'd ever known, to become part of a family farm with a rich history and a promising future. The contrast was so stark it almost seemed unreal, yet the ring on her finger, the warm farmhouse around her, the love that filled her heart, these were undeniably real. This was her life now. Tomorrow would make it official. Christmas Eve morning arrived with perfect weather for a wedding. Snow sparkling in the sunshine, the sky a clear bright blue. Emma bustled into Natalie's room early, carrying coffee and excitement in equal measure. "It's your wedding day," she announced, throwing open the curtains to let in the morning light, "and it's going to be perfect." The hours seemed to fly by as they prepared. Emma helped Natalie with her hair and makeup, keeping everything simple and natural as Natalie had requested. The dress they'd found at a vintage shop in the next town over was elegant in its simplicity, ivory satin with delicate lace details, perfectly suited to a Christmas Eve wedding in a small country church. "You look beautiful," Emma said softly as Natalie stood before the mirror, the finished effect taking even her by surprise. "Like you were born to be a wild." Natalie smiled at her soon-to-be sister-in-law's reflection. "That's exactly how I feel." When it was time to leave for the church, they found Daniel waiting by his truck, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs and red berries for the occasion. He wore a charcoal gray suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame, his usually unruly hair neatly combed for once. His eyes widened when he saw Natalie in her wedding dress, a look of wonder crossing his face. "You're incredible," he breathed, seeming to forget Emma's presence entirely. "Save it for the ceremony, Romeo," Emma laughed, stepping between them. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the wedding." "Too late," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving Nat. "Faced besides, we're not exactly traditional. Or at least ride to the church separately," Emma insisted. "I'll take Natalie in my rental car. You go on ahead and make sure everything's ready." Daniel reluctantly agreed, but not before stealing a quick kiss from his bride. "See you at the altar," he whispered. The small white church in Millfield had been beautifully decorated for Christmas, with evergreen garlands, red poinsettias, and white candles creating a festive, romantic atmosphere. As Natalie waited in the small anteroom with Emma, she could hear the church filling with people, not just their invited guests, but it seemed the entire community had turned out to witness the union of Daniel Wilde and the woman who had appeared so unexpectedly in their midst just 6 months ago. "Ready?" Emma asked as the pianist began playing Ukami, Ukami, Emmanuel, the cue for them to enter. Natalie nodded, a sense of perfect calm settling over her. There were no last-minute jitters, no doubts, no second thoughts. Just absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, about to marry the man she was meant to love. With Emma as her bridesmaid, Natalie walked down the short aisle of the country church. The faces that turned to watch her pass were all familiar now, neighbors, friends, people who had welcomed her into their community. Mrs. Jenkins dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Judge Wilson nodded approvingly. Even Frank and Melissa Carter were there, sitting quietly at the back, their presence a surprising but not unwelcome sign of the healing that had begun. And at the altar, waiting beside Pastor Mike, was Daniel. His face as she approached was a study in love and wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. When she reached him and he took her hands in his, the connection between them was so strong Natalie could almost see it, a golden thread, binding their hearts together. Pastor Mike's ceremony was simple but profound, focusing on the commitment they were making not just to each other but to the land and community they had fought to preserve. When it came time for their vows, Daniel spoke first, his voice steady and sure. "Natalie," he began, "when you knocked on my door 6 months ago, I had no idea my life was about to change forever. You came looking for food and work, but what you gave me was so much more: purpose, joy, partnership, love. You saw value in my farm when others saw only dollar signs. You saw strength in me when I was afraid I'd lose everything. You believed in us when the odds were against us." He squeezed her hands gently, his blue eyes holding hers. "I promise to love you every day of our lives together, to work beside you, to build with you, to face whatever comes our way as your partner and your husband, to give you a home where you always know your worth isn't something you have to earn. It's the essence of who you are." Tears welled in Natalie's eyes as she began her own vows. "Daniel, I came to your farm with nothing but hope and desperation. You gave me shelter, but more than that, you gave me the chance to rebuild myself. You saw me, really saw me when I felt invisible to the world. You valued me for who I am, not what I could give you." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I promise to love you faithfully and completely, to work beside you in the fields and in our home, to face challenges with the same courage and determination we found when we fought for this farm, to be your wife, your partner, your best friend, for all the days of our life together." As they exchanged rings, his a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandfather, hers the diamond that had been his grandmother's, Natalie felt the weight of history and tradition, of family ties that now included her. When Pastor Mike pronounced them husband and wife, and Daniel kissed her with tender passion, The church erupted in applause and cheers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pastor Mike announced with a broad smile, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Daniel and Natalie Wilde." Hand in hand, they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, stepping out into the crisp winter air where snowflakes had begun to fall gently, as if nature itself were offering a blessing on their union. The reception was held in the church hall, decorated with evergreen bows, twinkling lights, and red berries. Betty from the diner had catered a feast of comfort food: roast turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, and homemade rolls. Mrs. Jenkins' famous apple pies served as the wedding cake, topped with a simple bride and groom figurine that Emma had found. As they ate and celebrated with their friends and neighbors, Natalie was struck again by how much had changed in 6 short months. She had arrived in this community a stranger, broke and broken. Now she sat beside her husband, surrounded by people who had become family, in a place that had become home. After dinner, Judge Wilson tapped his glass for attention. "If I might say a few words," he began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "I've known Daniel Wilde since he was a boy, running through his grandmother's garden with muddy boots and a big heart. Martha always said he was special, that he had his father's strength and his mother's compassion. She worried, though, that he might spend his life alone on that farm, too stubborn to let anyone close after losing so much." The judge's eyes twinkled. As he continued, "I think Martha would be mighty pleased with how things turned out. In Natalie, Daniel has found not just a wife, but a true partner, someone who shares his love for the land, his commitment to community, his vision for the future. And in Daniel, Natalie has found what we all hope for: a love that sees us clearly, that values us completely, and stands beside us no matter what storms may come." He raised his glass higher. "To Daniel and Natalie Wilde, may your love continue to grow like the crops you tend, nourished by hard work, patience, and the changing seasons of life." To Daniel and Natalie, the room echoed, glasses raised in celebration. As the evening progressed, Daniel led Natalie onto the small dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. The pianist played in the bleak midwinter, an unusual choice perhaps, but one that spoke to their love of the land in all its seasons. "Happy, Mrs. Wilde," Daniel murmured as they swayed together. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Natalie replied truthfully. "And you, Mr. Wilde?" "Completely," he said, pulling her closer. "Though I keep thinking about Grandma Martha, how much she would have loved you. How happy she'd be to see the farm thriving again. I feel like I know her," Natalie said softly. "Through you, through this place that she loved so much." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "She's part of it all: the house, the fields, the way we live. And now you're part of it too." The next chapter in the story of Wild Creek Farm. As they danced, snow continuing to fall gently outside the windows, Natalie thought about that story, how it had begun generations ago with Daniel's ancestors, how it had nearly ended with Frank Carter's schemes, how it now continued with their marriage and the new vision they were creating together. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and they had returned to the farmhouse as husband and wife, Daniel carried Natalie over the threshold once more, this time with the weight of tradition and commitment behind the gesture. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wilde," he said, setting her down in the warm kitchen that had become the heart of their life together. "I've been home since the day I met you," Natalie replied, reaching up to touch his face tenderly. "But it's nice to make it official." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Wild Creek Farm in a pristine blanket of white. Inside, Daniel and Natalie Wilde began their life as husband and wife, their love a testament to the healing power of kindness, the strength found in partnership, and the hope that blooms when two hearts find where they truly belong. Spring came early to Wild Creek Farm that year. The fields thawed, revealing rich soil ready for planting. The creek ran high with melted snow, its music a constant backdrop to their days. In the orchard, buds appeared on the apple trees, promising a bountiful harvest in the fall. For Natalie, that first spring as Daniel's wife brought a new understanding of the rhythms of farm life. She learned to read the weather, to know when it was time to plant, to sense the subtle shifts in the seasons that determined their work and their rest. "You're a natural farmer's wife," Daniel told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset over fields newly planted with corn and beans. "Hard to believe you were a city girl just a year ago." "I think I was always meant for this life," Natalie replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Just took me a while to find my way." Here, as summer approached, they expanded their agritourism business, adding new workshops and farm experiences. The guests who came to Wild Creek Farm left with more than just honey and jam. They took with them a connection to the land, an understanding of where their food came from, and often a desire to return. One warm day in late May, as Natalie was preparing the farmhouse kitchen for a bread-making workshop, she felt a sudden wave of dizziness. She steadied herself against the counter, waiting for it to pass. "You okay?" Emma asked, visiting again from California to help with the busy season. "Fine," Natalie assured her, "just stood up too quickly." But the dizziness returned the next day, along with a strange fatigue that made even simple tasks seem challenging. When Daniel found her napping in the middle of the afternoon, something she never did concern creased his brow. Maybe you should see Dr. Collins, he suggested, sitting on the edge of the bed beside her. You've been pushing yourself pretty hard with all the new workshops. Natalie started to protest, then thought better of it. She had been feeling different lately, tired in a way that seemed deeper than ordinary exhaustion, with occasional waves of nausea in the mornings. I'll call tomorrow, she promised. The appointment with Dr. Collins was brief but illuminating. As Natalie drove home afterward, her mind was spinning with the news, excitement and nervousness battling for dominance in her heart. Daniel was in the barn when she returned, repairing equipment for the summer season. He looked up when she entered, immediately setting aside his tools when he saw her expression. What is it? He asked, crossing to her in quick strides. Are you sick? Natalie shook her head, a smile breaking through her nervousness. Not sick, she said softly. Pregnant. Daniel's eyes widened, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. Pregnant, you mean ... We're having a baby in about 7 months. Natalie confirmed, watching his face anxiously. They had talked about children, of course, but had thought perhaps they'd wait a year or two, get the farm on more solid financial footing first. A baby, Daniel repeated, his voice filled with wonder. Slowly, a smile spread across his face, then grew into a grin of pure joy. He lifted Natalie off her feet, spinning her in a gentle circle before setting her carefully back down. We're having a baby. His enthusiasm banished Natalie's lingering worry. You're happy about this? She asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Daniel replied, his hands moving to cradle her face. Natalie, this is ... It's everything. Our family, our future, growing right along with the farm. That evening they sat on the porch as they often did, but with a new awareness between them, the knowledge that their family of 2 would soon become 3. The farm that had been Daniel's legacy, that had become their shared home, would someday belong to their child. Boy or girl? What do you hope for? Natalie asked, her hand resting lightly on her still flat stomach. Daniel considered the question. Seriously healthy, of course, he said first. Beyond that ... be happy with either a son to teach farming, a daughter to wrap around my finger. His eyes twinkled, though if she's anything like her mother, I'm in trouble. Natalie laughed, leaning into his embrace. I think I'd like a little boy with your eyes and your kind heart, she admitted. But mostly, I just want this baby to grow up loved, the way we didn't always feel loved as children. Daniel nodded, understanding in his gaze. They had both had their share of pain in childhood, his from loss, hers from parents who had seen her as an achievement rather than a person. Their child would know a different kind of upbringing, one rooted in unconditional love and the steady rhythms of farm life. He or she will know every day how much they're wanted, Daniel promised, his hand covering hers over their growing child. How much they belong here, with us. As summer gave way to fall, Natalie's body changed along with the landscape. Her belly grew round, containing their greatest hope for the future. Daniel watched over her with loving protectiveness, insisting she rest more and work less as her pregnancy progressed. I'm pregnant, not sick, Natalie would protest when he tried to take over her chores. Humor me, Daniel would reply, kissing her forehead. I'm new at this husband of pregnant wife thing. The nursery took shape in the small room next to theirs, once a storage space, now transformed with pale yellow walls and furniture Daniel built himself. Emma sent packages from California, tiny clothes, soft blankets, books to read to the baby. Mrs. Jenkins organized a shower with the women from church, filling the farmhouse with laughter and gifts and advice for the mother-2-B. In December, just before Christmas, Dr. Collins confirmed what Natalie had begun to suspect during her last ultrasound. Twins, he announced, pointing to the screen where 2 distinct shapes could be seen. Fraternal twins, a boy and a girl, both looking perfectly healthy. Daniel's face when she told him was a study in emotion shock giving way to joy, then a brief flash of panic before settling into determined happiness. Twins, he repeated, as if trying the word on for size. 2 babies, are you worried? Natalie asked, recognizing the momentary fear that had crossed his features. A little, Daniel admitted honestly. That's twice as many diapers, twice as many college funds to save for. Then he smiled, pulling her close. But also twice as much love, twice as many first steps and first words, twice as many of our children to raise on this land. When put that way, Natalie couldn't help but share his joy. Twins hadn't been in their plans. But then, neither had she planned to end up at Wild Creek Farm in the first place. Life, she was learning, rarely followed the paths we expected, but sometimes led us to places more wonderful than we could have imagined. On a snowy evening in late January, exactly 1 year after they had married in the little white church in Millfield, Natalie went into labor. The drive to the hospital was tense but quick, Daniel's hands steady on the wheel despite his obvious nervous excitement. 12 hours later, exhausted but radiant, Natalie held their daughter while Daniel cradled their son. They had chosen names that honored the past while looking to the future. Martha Emma for the little girl, named after Daniel's grandmother and sister. Michael Thomas for the boy, After Pastor Mike and Natalie's favorite teacher from childhood who had been the only adult to truly see her potential. They're perfect, Daniel whispered, gazing down at his son's tiny face. Absolutely perfect. They are, Natalie agreed, touching their daughter's cheek with a gentle finger. Our little wild ones. As they sat together in the quiet hospital room, their newborn twins sleeping peacefully in their arms. Natalie reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From desperate hunger to abundant love, from homelessness to creating a home. From isolation to family, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet it wasn't a miracle that had saved her, but the simple kindness of the man beside her. Man who had opened his door to a stranger and offered not just food and shelter, but his heart. A man who now sat beside her, holding their son while she cradled their daughter. His eyes filled with the same steady love that had changed her life. Thank you, she said softly. Neil looked up from their son's sleeping face. For what? For everything, Natalie replied simply. For taking a chance on me that day. For loving me when I couldn't love myself. For giving me a home, a purpose. She glanced down at the babies, a family. Daniel's eyes grew tender. You gave me all those things too, Natalie. I was just existing before you came. Going through the motions, working the farm because it was what I'd always done. What I thought I had to do. He reached across to touch her face gently. You made it a choice, a passion again. You made it a home again. As snowflakes fell softly outside the hospital window, Daniel and Natalie Wild held their newborn twins, the next generation of a family rooted in love and the rich soil of Wild Creek Farm. The journey that had begun with a desperate knock on a farmhouse door had led to this moment of perfect completion, to hearts and to new lives, bound together by a love as steady as the seasons, as enduring as the land they called home. I think, Daniel said softly, looking from his wife to their children, this is what happily ever after feels like. And in her heart, Natalie knew he was right. The end.